All right, why don't we get it started off? I'm going to hand it over to Urs for our welcoming and start.
Well, thank you, Lance. Hello, everyone. So good to see you all back, even if it's only virtually on the screen, but nonetheless. I'm so delighted to welcome all of you on behalf of the Digital Asia Hub, the Berkman Klein Center, and the network of centers to this grande finale of the Spring 21 Research Sprint on Digital Self-Determination. A particular warm welcome to all the guests that are joining us today from around the globe. And of course, congratulations to the Sprint participants who have been working with us intensely over the past 3 months. Congratulations. By way of background, this research sprint is part of a series hosted by the Global Network of Internet and Society Centers, which brings together more than 100 centers studying society and technology issues around the globe. Each research sprint is hosted by a different NOC center. Now, this particular one that we're celebrating today was co-hosted by the Digital Asia Hub and the Berkman Klein Center. The sprints in general are focused on questions of ethics of digital transformation. So a very broad framing is organized under the patronage of the German federal president and generally supported by the Mercator Foundation. Today's sprint that's concluding here was also supported by the Swiss federal government, represented today by Ambassador Dubach, who I can't see on my screen, but I trust is somewhere. This sprint focused on a particularly interesting and multifaceted normative concept called digital self-determination. This is a new concept, relatively new in terms of how it has started to make an entry into the vocabulary not only of digital ethics, but also of public policy discourse, of internet governance conversations and the like. And as we will hear later on, it's also a concept that's at the core of Switzerland's foreign national strategy. So it's definitely an interesting term, a different concept. And what the sprint participants have been doing over the past few months is actually explore what this concept means. Or perhaps a better way to think about it is what meaning we could and should give to this concept at this formative stage. The sprint participants, together with experts, looked at horizontal issues, including questions not only of the self, but also of solidarity and communality, questions of equity, questions of participation, data protection, including the need also for a new social contract. In addition to these horizontal themes, the sprint participants have engaged in vertical topics, in deep dives. For instance, what does digital self-determination mean, or how could it look like when it comes to participating in the digital economy? What is the meaning of the concept in digital health, or when we talk about trustworthy data spaces? What are prerequisites and preconditions, for instance, when it comes to information flows and information diets? So you can see a broad range of topics and a web of different application areas. Now, this sprint in particular has also been an experiment. It's been a co-production of both learnings and knowledge. We've brought together a really diverse community of learners, and I would include the experts in that group too. We are all learners here coming together, and it's been a fascinating journey for me, for sure, to really embrace the bidirectional learning experience. We have brought together a global community, and we will, I'm sure, hear more about that, the importance of a global perspective when exploring and defining and using concepts such as digital self-determination in policy discourse. It's also been an experiment in the sense that we try to share our learnings real time. So we produced a newsletter, we created and edited a Wikipedia entry. I'm sure we'll hear more about that. We created digital artifacts and shared them out, again, as a way to document our learnings, to invite additional insights, to be in conversations and interaction. And today, of course, we would like to use this concluding event to feature some of the key insights, to feature some of our main learnings in a slightly more public form. So this session is recorded, and as I mentioned, also includes guests who haven't been participants in the sprint. We will hear from sprint participants and students as well as from others what they have learned. We will have a commentary also from sprint mentors and subject matter experts. We have videos, we'll have space for open discussion. So this will be a ton of fun, and I'm so excited and grateful to have you here. Let me just end by sharing a few thanks. So first of all, thanks to Malavika Jayaram and Dev Lewis at the Digital Asia Hub for collaboration, as well as the many members of the NOC, the Network of Centers and Partner Organizations, including the Internet and Jurisdiction Network, Wikimedia Foundation, the AI Center at SMU Law School in Singapore, the GovLab, our colleagues who are here as well from the University of Zurich, the Humboldt Institute, many represented here, and many others who have contributed. Of course, we're also grateful to the Mercator Foundation and the Swiss government for making this possible and supporting this research sprint and other sprints as well. Special thanks, however, are due to Lance Eaton, to Ruben Langevin, to Bernardo Caicedo and Siddharth Chawan, as well as Liz Sylvan, who have done much of the heavy lifting of this sprint. Now, last but not least, thanks to all the sprint participants. We are so grateful for your engagement and so eager to hear from you and discuss your learning. So I stop here and turn it over to Malavika, who will facilitate the opening session. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Urs. You set up this whole session really well. Everything from what came before, the origin story, right up to why we're all here today. And actually just how sad it is not having this in my calendar every Thursday. So this grand finale, this art gallery of artifacts, this museum that we've co-created is wonderful. And I think for me, the most exciting thing is that it is bottoms up, collaborative, co-created. It hasn't been a top-down experience, and I think we're all stewards and collaborators in this amazing experiment. So it's in that spirit that I call on 3 of our sprint participants to share their highlights and takeaways. Chronologically, we'll have Carmen telling us about the first 3 sessions, Mary Rolleen telling us about the next 3, and then Constanza bringing us to the last 2 sessions of this amazing event. So over to you, Carmen. 3 minutes for each, please. Thanks.
Yes, thank you. So for everyone tuning in, I'm Carmen. I'm originally from Hong Kong. The daunting question, how do we begin to even research digital self-determination? It's really tricky because for me, maybe none of the related topic domains like AI ethics or data protection really try to converge so much to the intimate point of the self. So we're talking about exercising of free will. We're talking about flourishing of identities in all sorts of economic or political choices. So all these aspects where the self could manifest from the inside versus maybe exploited from the outside in a digital environment. So right from session 1, my takeaway was that it's a challenge to simply map the points of tension between the interior and exterior, if I could put it that way. And there's no one easy scope of the concept. Then moving on to session 2, I think it became a little bit more obvious that we can't really discuss the concept without considering power, at least to me. Because essentially, the tension between the interior and exterior is an interplay of power. And it's not a theoretical question, but very much alive in different diverse contexts or different populations. I think 2 assignments we did that week further supported that. We compare the term digital self-determination with its closest translation in different languages. And we learned that in many languages, there is no such term yet. And even the core words, the related words, are understood quite differently across cultures. We also built that bibliography of, I think, nearly 100 relevant research papers or documents. And we discover a huge variety of topics, from privacy laws in Europe, digital colonialism in Africa, access for indigenous people, or China's social credit systems, and more. So my second takeaway from that week is that, yes, it's not easy to map it out, but we still should not talk about it in a vacuum, detached from the context of power, cultures, and history, which I think then connects perfectly to the third session, because then we really zoomed in a little bit and try to put the concept into the specific context of survival. We discussed that week with different speakers. What's the role of the internet, for example, for Hong Kong's future democracy? Or how do we approach or understand the issue of politically active women in Pakistan receiving online backlash for their activism? I think later on, my fellow participant will talk a little bit more about the interesting artifact from that week about informational life form. But for me, my own takeaway from that week is that beyond the principal level of discussion, we should also zoom into different specific contexts, particularly for those that might be a matter of life and death. So I think that's a condensed version of my own takeaway, handing over to Mary.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rory Torres. I'm from the Philippines. So for sessions 4, 5, 6, one of my key takeaways is that the digital environment in different contexts can be empowering, but also exploitative. And the challenge is how to uplift and protect the individual voice, leading towards self-determination. So in the fourth session, we talked about the individual desire of workers for autonomy, flexibility, choice, and how these values have given rise to the gig economy. Yet these so-called freedoms can be exploited and fail to provide what traditional and protected employer-employee relationships do. So as a participant in the digital economy, I'm curious as to how the workplace is evolving and how there's a blurring of lines between the social and the commercial, and how it will affect my and our ability to thrive in that kind of economy. On the fifth session, as an example of how AI can be used in health tech, we talked about COVID-19 tracing apps and how many of us shared our personal health and location information to these applications under the premise that it would help us personally to know our exposure to the virus, or even help the community and our government in containing the pandemic. So in the Sparks, we realized that there is a tension between the level of privacy, the epidemiological utility, as well as how health data still has a murky definition. And I realized how part of digital self-determination is in knowing how exposed one's data is, the need to have a realistic option or choice, and the ability to reverse that choice even in a so-called data emergency. Finally, on the sixth session, we talked about information diets, which was one of my personal favorites because the topic really resonated to me as someone who hails from a small town in rural Philippines, where I'm back now thanks to COVID-19, and how despite being in a rural community, because of the internet, I can have access to so much data and generate so much information from my waking hours, even while I'm sleeping, because I have my Fitbit tracking my sleep data. I particularly enjoyed the Spark with Professor Jenner, who highlighted different ways on how to slow down our intake of digital information, because part of digital self-determination is curating what is relevant information for oneself and having that moment to reflect on them, because the digital space makes it so easy to get overwhelmed by information or mis or disinformation, and it can be paralyzing. So in conclusion, I was fascinated by these 3 sessions and how we've explored different areas of the digital space and how the digital self comes into the picture, For me, the challenge is to give a voice to the individual. And by voice, I just don't mean a space to post, although social media is a huge part of it, but kind of a dialogue of social, cultural, and historical matters, and the ability to amplify one's belongingness, meaning, identity, and purpose in the digital era. So that's it. And I'll turn it over now to Constanza.
Thank you, Rory. Hi, everyone. I'm Constanza. I'm from Chile. And I'll be talking about the last two sessions we had, which were super exciting to me. The first special session was led by the GovLab, or Governance Lab, an Action Research Center at NYU. And we heard about their mission to improve the efficiency and legitimacy of public interest decision-making by leveraging new tools and technologies. And they do this by focusing on what they call two important assets. So first of all, data, taking advantage of the exponentially increasing datafication of most aspects of society for evidence-based decision-making, and very importantly, people, by bringing together the multiple stakeholders that are involved in governance and fostering practices that capitalize on collective intelligence, rather than, for example, having the policymakers making decisions in a vacuum. In particular, we heard about the importance of building a social license that they call for their data practices, where the frameworks for what, who, when, and why, all these questions around data collection, management, use, and reuse can in fact be co-determined by various sectors of society, including data holders in the private sector, the policymakers, civil rights organizations, and very importantly, the diverse range of citizens and residents that will be affected by, for better or worse, by the data practices. Interestingly, the GovLab doesn't just, which I thought was very interesting, doesn't just consult with all these actors for the goal of setting general frameworks for responsible use or reuse of data. They go a step farther to build on this collective intelligence to actually identify which policy questions regarding immigration, gender, climate change, a number of others, are actually the ones that the government should be focusing on in the first place. So they consult with domain experts and have systems for public voting so that they can identify which are the most transformative and pressing questions that can and should be answered by data. Again, as opposed to having just technocrats or experts determining top-down what those questions should be. The second special session was led by the Edgelands Institute, an interdisciplinary pop-up institute aimed at redrawing the social contract, nothing less, in the context of mass urbanization, surveillance, and in general, global emergencies that we're facing, such as the COVID pandemic and climate change. So during the session, we reflected on how digitization is changing the norms and the social dynamics defining our relationships with cities. And we also had the chance to reimagine what those might look like in the future in the context of potentially establishing human colonies or settlements on other planets. So with this Red Skies project, we engaged in a collective thought experiment, which I thought could have been an entire research sprint on its own, where we imagined designing a new social contract for the first human settlement on Mars in 2046. Here we discuss in groups what policies we might want to implement with regards to information and media, health, employment, and data and privacy. So for instance, we discussed very thought-provoking questions like the balance between respecting individual privacy and keeping this new highly vulnerable, highly data-driven and dependent settlement running efficiently and safely, whether individuals should have a choice in the work that they do, or whether we should have a system that optimizes for work efficiency and productivity, whether the government should leverage intensive biometric analyses to nudge settlers to adopt certain health behaviors, and so on. Across the groups, I saw that there were some common themes about the need for decentralized systems for data management so that personal data can be protected. The importance of having not just centralized services, but multiple alternatives so that individuals can retain some autonomy and some choice over the products and services that they engage with. And also the need for building revision and amendment mechanisms into the new social contract so that new generations that weren't present when the social contract was being drawn can also have a say on how their society is being run, and also so that the new society can also rapidly adapt to emergency situations. So I thought that session was a very interesting way of bringing us back to the beginning, where we had the chance to rethink as a group, what are some of the most important values bringing us together that we would definitely want to enforce if we were to build a new society. So I thought it brought us full circle, and it was very exciting to wrap up with that.
Great, thank you all so much. You've covered everything from colonial legacies to colonizing Mars, and straddled the breadth from Hong Kong and the Philippines all the way to Chile, which I think just exemplifies what this sprint was about. And I know we're short of time, and I'm so personally excited to watch all the artifacts being displayed that I'm going to hand over to Lance to try and get us back on time. Thank you so much, the three of you. It was wonderful to hear your highlights.
I second that. Thank you, everyone. We're going to switch over, and we're going to have what we're calling the showcase of artifacts. And for those that are coming in each week, we had participants actually working and creating things that will go into our repository, and I'll show that at the end of this, of this living syllabus, so that other people can kind of take what we've been doing here and learn from it. So we're going to go through each person. So originally we set this up as people can volunteer to talk about their own, but Carolina, one of our participants, made the strong, encouraging recommendation to have participants nominate other people's work as an opportunity to highlight and really show how other people have impacted one another. So I heard that and I thought, gosh, I wish I had thought of that before setting it up. So what we're having is participants who are volunteering to talk about other people's artifacts from different sessions. I'll put all of the links in the chat, and the participants will have 2 minutes per session to discuss. So first up, we have Thomas, and he's going to talk briefly about Anna's and Araldo's pieces from session 1.
Sure, awesome. So I'm gonna paste a link on the chat if that's, or has it been done? Okay, perfect. So I'm gonna make a comment first of all about Ana Margarita Coelho, who made this artifact about session 1. And oh, great, thank you, Lance. So yeah, so this artifact I think is really, really interesting. It's a poster about self-determination, what it means to her. I found really interesting. There's a quote by Fanon here that I think it directs attention to how this is not just about technology in a deterministic way, but how are we seen by other subjects, right? About the relational aspect of this. And I think that we usually still use self-determination as something that has like an external determination, right? We sometimes fall into like a tech deterministic idea that we need to erase technology from the equation. So I'm glad to see technology not being essentialized here. And I'm talking about the last section of the poster, right? When it differentiates between privacy issues, law, policies, algorithmic factors, and just commenting about our presence on the internet, on the digital sphere, as something that is mediated not just by created technology, but also by created technology of laws and policies that is, sort of a social technology, which I think it's a really, really interesting point. And the second artifact I wanted to comment is by Heraldo Sousa dos Santos. And this piece echoes something that has been said in many pieces. That is that digital self-determination is about pedagogy. Heraldo calls it literacy, but I think it refers to a sort of education, right? And it's just been something that our speakers have also highlighted. So I think it sheds light on how it's about a challenge of how do we create digital citizens, right? How we can train people to make decisions in the digital sphere, and how that is obviously related to self-determination. So I was thinking about this this morning, that I don't know how many people here are iPhone users, but iPhone recently had an option to allow you whether you wanted to share data with other apps. And I think that speaks of the feedback between how our education and our empowerment can lead to companies making changes on their products, but also how these products can also engage us in reflection and make valuable decisions about our data, our lives, and how we interact on the internet. So I think it's something that's very interesting about a feedback loop going on here.
Excellent, thank you. I'm going to pass it over to Adil, who will be talking about Naditha's work.
Hello everyone, I'm Idil and I'm from Turkey. And I will talk about Nadita's work on an assignment to identify and empower an informational life form. She speaks in her article about kings, queens, and gurus from Tamil stories that she heard from her grandparents, and which brings her moral and community knowledge. But however, she notices by time the regional literature is not really existent in the digital sphere due to the coloniality of English language. And she also mentions bringing back the regional information structure to empower her own regional literature. And actually, her work is very interesting because it exactly helped me to compare the situation of our minority communities here in Turkey in the context of solidarity and communality. Our minority communities knowledge is also very non-existent in the digital sphere because of the ongoing violence and discrimination over the years. And the coloniality of mainstream culture is both in online and offline life, has been excluding the other minority and indigenous groups and people like Assyrians, Kurds, Alevi communities, and Hemshin people here in Turkey. And so it has become a crucial point for the political survival of our communities, not in a language context, but from a culture point of view. But in our current situation, it's hard to upheld the communal self-determination in both digital and offline sphere, as we are exposed to strict government oppression. But it is very highly beneficial to me to be aware of the other indigenous and minority communities situations in other countries and in other regions as the entire world. I mean, yes, thanks a lot.
Thank you. So now over to Naditha, who is going to talk about Carmen's work from session 4.
Thank you, Edo and Lance. So for session 4, our assignment prompted us to think a little bit about creating an artifact on digital economy and what it means to be able to participate in a digital economy. So Carmen Ng produced and created a podcast where she introduces us to Yoko Matsuda, who along with her father, Matsuda Seihon, runs a 60-year-old bookbinding and letter printing studio in Kyoto. And their studio has benefited by tapping into the digital economy by using Airbnb, the digital platform, to connect their craft of bookbinding with customers across the world. So this was to me a segue from thinking about a dying informational life form into thinking about how it can be revived using digital media as well. And Carmen and Yoko discuss how Japanese craftsmen, or the shokunin more generally in Japan, and specifically in the case of bookbinding, are leveraging digital media platforms to connect with customers and create new communities, sell crafts or teach workshops and maintain social media presence. And they talk about how Airbnb has become this new experience economy that commodifies this sort of interaction that they have with the locals as well as customers all around the world. And so digital self-determination in this case has become sort of an enabling and vital link for their cultural survival, as well as a cultural empowerment for their craft. And so I found that really interesting to think about digital economy in relation to an information life form. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So now we have Kyle, who is going to take on the monstrous task of talking about 3 different people's artifacts, Idil's, Rachid's, and Constanza's, and somehow try to do it in about 2 or 3 minutes. So welcome, Kyle.
Thanks. And let me say this is possible within 2 to 3 minutes. And the reason is that in session 5, we're talking about COVID tracing apps and their restrictions on digital self-determination. And there's a common theme for all these 3 artifacts, in the sense that they all show that these COVID tracing apps do restrict digital self-determination in some way or another. For example, let me start with it is a discussion of the Turkish tracing app. And there, it's basically your classical image of a COVID tracing app that has some issues with data privacy. The app shares data between government departments, and that's a big concern because the data could be shared with, say, the Department of Internal Affairs, and there has been concerns about using those data to crack down on protests. Constanza's discussion of the Chilean app shows there is a problem with data storage. And in that case, the data is actually stored offshore in the US and Virginia. So then it raises questions of who has access to the data and who has jurisdiction over the data stored, because it's Chilean citizens' data stored in the US. So it's not clear who will have jurisdictions over the data stored there. And finally, Rashid's discussion of the Moroccan app brings me to this point that these tracing apps can be exported. So if the tracing app is exploitative, we can the governments can actually export exploitation in that way. And in the case of the Moroccan app, it's actually a copy of the Singaporean app. So then it raises question: would the sharing of this kind of tracing technology be another way of the exportation of exploitation, or the exportation of the restrictions on digital self-determination? So this is a collection of COVID tracing apps in the Global South, and we all see there are some common themes going on with regards to like restrictions on privacy, restrictions on digital self-determination, questions about data storage, and also questions about, digital colonialism. Thank you.
Did it. Excellent. Thank you. And finally, we have Araldo, who is going to talk about Anna's and Carolina's artifacts from session 6.
So can you all hear me?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. So thank you very much. So I'm not a morning person, but I'm going to do my best. So for this assignment in session 6, we had to critically assess the content of one or more than one Wikipedia entry on a certain topic. We had to analyze, I quote, the tension between sources that are cited and lived experiences of people that are relevant to the article, end quote. So I find the 2 assignments I have chosen especially helpful for showing the ways in which the voices of a variety of social and political actors are often unheard in Wikipedia entries around political dissent and resistance. So Anna's assignment, for example, on the Coronation Revolution in Portugal, nicely shows how excluding certain voices affects the ways in which we understand the past. For example, how the voices and resistance of people from the colonies are absent from the entry on the revolution. Carolina's infographic shows how these dynamics of exclusion not only concern, or at least should not only concern, political stances closer to ours. So as a liberal activist, Carolina shows how liberal voices are not represented in the Wikipedia entry on the women's strike protest in Poland, characterized by pro-choice stance regarding abortion. Both outputs show, I would argue, how important it is for activists to have their voices represented in Wikipedia, given the power Wikipedia has in shaping public opinion. Where activists depend, and Carolina and Anna show, on published sources to include their voices on Wikipedia. And although we can agree with this policy for many reasons, it certainly can represent a problem. Activists frequently must rely on how historians and journalists write about them. They are often unable to directly challenge the very voices that make their voices unheard. That, I would argue, is something that should be taken seriously by us who study digital self-determination, and I think that Anna's and Carolina's outputs are terrific contributions to this debate.
Awesome. Thank you so much, and a great point to end on in looking at these different artifacts. I will be sharing kind of what that looks like when we come back from break. In the interest of time, though, I want to move over to our next activity, which is the open reflective discussion, which Ors will be leading. I will throw the questions we're kind of guiding folks on into the chat, and feel free, to take it from here, Urs.
Thank you, everyone. This has been a wonderful set of reflections already, and also a sampling of the amazing work you've been doing and the insights you produced and shared with all of us. So thank you for that. I would like to invite all community members who have come together today to weigh in on the discussion questions that Lance just shared, and thought I could sort of start by facilitating the conversation with a few popcorns, so to speak, that I would throw to some of our colleagues who have engaged throughout the sprint. And I'd like to start with something actually that Malavika offered in her remarks earlier on, and I hope she would be willing to expand on it a little bit. And that is, Malavika, you made the point that the concept of digital self-determination opens up a space for imagination, that one of the virtues of having a new term that isn't well established already and precisely defined in all details really is that it helps us to be creative and to also be playful. And so you mentioned, that throughout the sprint we've seen interesting bottom-up building blocks towards what could be digital self-determination for the future. And I was just curious whether you would be willing maybe to share one or two reflections where you have seen some sort of an opportunity to reimagining our futures in the context of this sprint, and as you engaged and looked for examples and manifestations and application areas of digital self-determination.
Sure, Urs. I think I'm in a kind of sci-fi bent of mind, so I might stick with the space theme. I think for me, what was really interesting was that session about sort of outer space and the rules and norms that might apply. I think it really led me to think about one of the beautiful things about the sprint was treating a greenfield site as a space of exploration, like literal, metaphorical, in so many ways. And, whether it was linguistic explorations or normative considerations, I think it was really interesting to say, if you suspended the laws of physics, if you suspended what was possible and really be visionary in your outlook, what are the concepts, whether it was a subsidiarity principle or something else, what were the different ways you could imagine something so far removed from our experience, and then sort of walk it back to saying, are those really out of this world? Literally, could we actually implement some of those? If we had a chance to remake certain institutions or certain theories or certain instruments, legal instruments, pieces of legislation, what would that look like? And so I think for me, one of the really exciting things that came out of this sprint was saying, you can telescope really in or out into very, very granular elements of a particular country or context, or you could go way out into outer space. And I think Carmen used the word tensions, and I really like sort of ideas of contestation, negotiation, tension. I think that sort of from the micro to the macro kind of breadth that we've had in the sprint, I think for me, that was really, really exciting to reimagine, revisualize, and not take things for granted, to say we can remake things in a very different frame, and we don't have to be bound by what exists. We can start afresh. I think for me, that was extremely inspiring.
Thank you so much, Malavika. And I was wondering, Dev, you have been involved in the sprint, obviously, as well as a key member of the Digital Asia Hub. You have done yourself a lot of work actually in across Asia and also particularly in China, looking at the social credit system and similar topics. I was wondering whether you have experienced in your research and work again, some sort of bottom-up manifestations of maybe also at times unexpected or unforeseen instances of digital self-determination. If I may put you on the spot, Dev, thank you.
Sure. Thanks, Urs. And hello, everyone. It's been so great to be part of this every week and hearing the ideas and provocations from each of you and from so many of the experts who we've had. And yeah, I mean, I've been based in China for the last few years, and like you mentioned, doing work on various aspects of technology and how it's changing life here. And of course, social credit is one part of that. And I'm always amazed actually by the creativity and the imagination to as Malvika was just talking about, that comes from this bottom-up internet really in Asia. And in China, for instance, despite the Great Firewall that we know and talk about all the time, and despite the increasing censorship and restrictions, we sort of see a sort of equal amount of creativity sort of come out to always sort of work around that. Recently, for instance, a great example is there was a big case in Sichuan of a suicide by a student, and a lot of sort of internet interest online on discussion and on conspiracy theories. And to evade censors, suddenly people started speaking in English because you had machine learning and automated censorship sort of preventing people from leaving certain comments. And likewise, I'm always amazed by the kind of spaces that emerge, groups of people that are creating their own internet spaces to talk and to discuss and share content. And I think from the outside, sometimes you sort of see this monolithic internet with its restrictions, but yet inside people almost in anticipation of so many of the controls and restrictions, sort of then always creative in thinking their own ways of finding ways to identify, to create spaces. So I think so, my take is to always to sort of go beyond that sort of mainstream view, and as you sort of embed yourself here, is to sort of find these nooks, find these crannies, and you'll find a real diverse sort of cultures emerging, and not just in China, but across Asia, really. And I think it's probably the most exciting time to be in this region right now, to see these communities emerge and thrive. And I'm sure so many of our Asian participants are, part of these communities and growing these communities themselves.
Thank you, Dave. I'm wondering, Andres Lombana, are you with us?
Yes.
I'd have a question for you. Great, thank you, Andres. So, Andres, I'm very well aware, of course, that your country, Colombia, is going through a very, very challenging time right now, and I was just want to offer my warmest thoughts to you and all friends from Colombia who are also some of you are on this call. I was wondering, as we're talking about the concepts such as digital self-determination and also moments of crisis, right? Whether it's a pandemic, whether it's a political crisis, whether it's a democratic crisis. What's your read? What are at a moment of where things are in a state of emergency? How much does this idea of digital self-determination carry through, or is it just something that really matters when things go well? I thought you may have thoughts on that, and maybe is there such a thing as digital self-determinations in moments of crisis?
Thank you, Urs. Yes, it's a good question, and I think the moments of crisis, as the one that we are having now in Colombia, I don't know if all the participants are aware of it, but we have been during 2 weeks in social protests on the streets, a lot of police violence, police brutality happening. Also, the media, right? We have seen the traditional media telling a narrative of terrorism, vandalism, but we have also seen the people on the streets, particularly the youth, right? Talking about youth and self-determination, telling their own narratives in ways that we haven't seen before in Colombia. One of the reasons is that mobile devices and telephones are now widespread in the population. So one way to have this self-determination is to witness, right? Witness brutality, witness violence is something that our country has had like many decades of war, but this kind of brutality was never documented. So I think this autonomy to tell the narrative from the perspective of the bottom up with these devices, even if the data is collected by platforms, right? The amount of evidence and the amount of narratives that have been circulating the past 2 weeks are impressive. Actually, the international media has picked them up and started actually to ask for collaborative journalism with citizens, because the traditional media in Colombia is not doing that. So The Guardian, for instance, in the UK opened a line in WhatsApp to collect the videos, the photographs, and well, a lot of NGOs that are fighting for human rights are also helping to build that narrative. So I think this self-determination in times of crisis can help a lot to have a perspective that is more balanced, but also creates more challenges for dialogue and discussion, because then you have like traditional media and the government telling one narrative, and then all the people on the streets telling other narrative with all these tools. And I think the space for dialogue is very complicated now, because if you talk, I talk to my students and to youth, and they have started to totally distrust the government and the traditional media. So they don't trust it. They are now just watching lives from the protests on the streets, collecting this media from the social media platforms. And then it's no space for dialogue. It makes it difficult when you have self-determination that doesn't have a common ground. So in context of war, crisis, on stable democracies, the self-determination can actually also undermine the building of a consensus. And I think that's a challenge, and we are trying to solve it, but it's tough.
Thank you, Andres, for sharing these observations. Very impressive. So far, we've heard just kind of a few stories, examples, observations from some sort of lived experiences of digital self-determination, of on-the-ground digital self-determination, if you will. And I was wondering, Wolfgang Schulz, if I may throw the popcorn over to you across the Atlantic and shift gears a little bit. In addition to these bottom-up observations and dynamics and manifestations, we're of course also at a moment of intense policy debates where concepts such as digital sovereignty and related, arguably, digital sovereignty are making an entry into international forums, in conversations between governments, into multi-stakeholder dialogues about laws and regulations and guiding principles and constitutional values. Now, given your background and expertise, and also actually, you know, your presentation in one of the first sessions in this sprint, I was just wondering, as we revisit the concept of digital self-determination, how helpful is it, almost as the flip side from the imagination that it invites, to use such terms, introduce such new concepts into policy discussions? Are there risks by having this degree of openness and ambiguity? Can such concepts be hijacked in policy conversations? Is it helpful to create, you know, this shared narrative that Andres was just alluding to, bottom up? Is there an opportunity top down? How do you think about some sort of the Rorschach effect of the term digital self-determination when it comes to the sphere of policy.
Yeah, thank you. Also, I tried to catch the popcorn in Europe and reflect on that a little. It's a fascinating question. I think at least two aspects to that. One is, and I would really like to thank the participants because it was really an eye-opener for me, this bottom-up approach, and to see how interesting it is what you can see when you do not try to systemize and start with these taxonomies, but if you really take serious the cultural context, the situation you are in, crisis versus not crisis, and your very personal experience here. So that is extremely helpful. And when you flip it this way, I think it's interesting to look at the European debate on digital sovereignty as a kind of talking about Europe. What do we do when we talk about digital sovereignty? It's a kind of discussion we have on what actually the values in Europe are. Are they really specific? What do we want to emphasize here? Do we want to be a closed community? And is sovereignty like a kind of autarky that we don't want to exchange? Or do we want to be an open society in Europe in terms of what happens in the field of digitization? So I think it's extremely helpful to see it this way as well. And I would wish that more people in Europe in the policy field would do that. Having said that, on the other hand, it is so complex a process in a governance system in Europe with all the relevant stakeholders here, that the conversation needs to have some focus if we want to get to a point where we really can have meaningful policy decisions here. So I think it's a force and back. I think we have to think in lines of do we need to make decisions? What are the preconditions for that? But we should not lose the sight on the other perspective to say, what are we doing here actually when we are having this kind of conversation? So I think it's extremely helpful to flip forth and back, to not be locked in one of the both perspectives. So that would be my initial take on that.
Thank you, Wolfgang. That's so helpful and thoughtful also to see the rhetorical space and the rhetorical function such a concept serves. Speaking of which, as I mentioned, the research sprint and the series of research sprints happens as a networked operation. And it's clear from what we've heard today already and learned throughout the sprint that much more discussion needs to happen, that much more exploration is needed, that we want to document bottom-up manifestations of digital self-determination, also better understand what are the new threats to digital self-determination in addition to the opportunities. And so I'm particularly delighted that this sprint here is not the end point, and we will see more opportunities for collaboration in the second half of today's session. But one specific opportunity, and I'm throwing the popcorn to Bernardo Gaicedo, is also other research centers that are part of NOC, of this growing network, are also considering research sprints. And Bernardo, I was wondering whether you could share in a few minutes before we take a break what's happening at ISUR, where you're involved in thinking about a continuation of the conversation, of course, also in a different cultural context. Over to you, Bernardo. Thank you.
Thank you, Urs. Thanks, Lance, Malavika, Liz, Sandra, for the support for this parallel sprint that we've been having in ISUR for the last 2 months. We've been replicating one by one these sessions with 10 participants. We've been hosted by the Faculty of Law at the Universidad del Rosario. And I think that has been great because on the one side, it made it possible, but on the other hand, we got a bit of a limitation because we had a rather homogeneous participant group. So one of the realizations is that it is great that these research sprints bring together people with such a diverse personal and professional backgrounds. And I thank you all for sharing your views on digital self-determination, because it has enriched also our participants indirectly. So we've replicated the sessions with the help of many friends. Some of them are here, of course, Julio Gaitan, the director of the center, Tomas Warna and Constanza Vidal visited us this week, and the great help of Andres Lombana, who put together an amazing session with startups, Colombian startups, mainly women. And that experience was fascinating for all of the participants. We've managed to create the same artifacts, but definitely not the Wikipedia entry. So we're very looking forward to your Wikipedia entry in English, and then we'll decide whether we translate it into Spanish or we create a new one. So just please know that we are paying attention to it as well. One insight is that definitely that chat we had at the beginning on the differences in languages and the nuances in the meaning of self-determination was key. In Spanish, we talk about autodeterminación. So that auto, I think, is softer than the self that is in self-determination. And probably as a Buddhist would say, the self was in the middle here. And we have that auto that is more itself. So it opens up the question of self-determination for individuals, collectives, communities, even the digital itself. Finally, I want to pass it over to Natalia Suarez, one of the participants at ESURS, and she is part of ESUR. And I'm sure that she can give us some insights about thinking on these from the South. Over to you, Natalia.
Thank you, Bernardo. Hello, everyone. I'm very happy to be here. Thanks for the invitation. I'm Natalia Suarez. I'm from Colombia. I'm a law and philosophy student at the University of Rosario and also a researcher at the Center of Internet and Society, ESUR. So today, I want to tell you about our experience in our research in Bogota, Colombia. For us, it was very useful to have the opportunity to view the videos of the guests in these, like the original research sprint, because it allowed us to generate knowledge and questions located in the Global South. So today, more than statements, I want to share with you some concerns that came up in our context around the concept of digital self-determination. So actually, after listening to you, I realized that we have many questions in common. To begin with, as Bernardo already mentioned, we are a group of lawyers, so we have the main concern about the legal and also social consequences of considering digital self-determination as a right itself, like derived from the right to privacy and also from the right to freedom of expression. I mean, would this make it possible to leave aside the general concern of all of us for concrete legal regulations on cyberspaces and allow a self-regulation of individuals and communities? To continue, we felt very challenged by the session on life forms, threats, and ways to defend them, especially because we reflected on how the internet is also a space of hegemonic and also dominant discourses and languages, which can put Colombian diversity at risk, especially if we take into account that in Colombia we have at least 65 recognized indigenous languages, of which there is almost no online content. So that's like really important. In this sense, we consider that digital self-determination is also mediated by languages and alphabets available to create and consume content. On this same topic, we identified digital illiteracy in Colombia as a risk factor, as we consider that it can endanger social leaders who, without knowing how the infrastructures work, can be geolocated or even harmed. Likewise, we found that the introduction of technologies is different in each context due to the basic conditions on each place. Thus, in Colombia, there are territories whose basic conditions are not warranted. So internet can play the role of an exponentiator of inequalities and social precariousness. In this sense, reflect on the extent to which the digital entrepreneurship can lead to or be born of conditions of labor precariousness. Finally, we emphasize that women in Latin America in feminist campaigns have found the internet as a space of dissemination, pedagogy, strengthening networks, and in general, building means of protection and promotion of human rights, as indicated by cyber-feminist bets. This could be an ideal scenario for analyzing digital self-determination in its dual sense, I mean individual and also collective. To conclude, as final reflections, I would like to express that throughout each of the sessions, the concept of digital self-determination was transforming, complexifying, expanding, taking on new tones, and all above it, localizing for each one of us in Colombia. As final questions, we were left with the interest to investigate the right to be forgotten on the internet, the affectation to the personality due to the internet, self-determinations in times of COVID-19, also personal autonomy, self-determination in times of crisis, and the role of social networks in large platforms. Finally, I highlight the great work of my colleagues in the creation of the artifacts, such as infographics, videos, podcasts, case studies. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Natalia and Bernardo. Obviously, what you shared with us shows the generative power of the research sprint here, and also the wonderful insights you added to the experience of this sprint here. So we should take seriously what Bernardo said and put the self in the middle. So we take a break now to get a coffee or water or tea, whatever you need to stretch your legs. We will reconvene in 5 minutes.
Just about at the 5-minute mark. So we're going to transition into the second half. And as a start to that, what I wanted to actually do was, as we've been talking about the Wikipedia entry and the syllabus, I wanted to give a just an initial glimpse. They're still in the, working to finish up and refine. And as people who are familiar with Wikipedia, there's a lot of details that go into making an entry that is both well received and comprehensive. So I'm going to share my screen right now. And I'm hoping everybody can see the screen that says digital self-determination, living syllabus. Is that, can people folks? Okay, I see head nods. Excellent. So I just want to give a show of this is currently in draft form, but give a sense of kind of what we've been doing throughout the sprint is taking together the different pieces, the different materials that the speakers and session leads have been giving us as learning materials going into the session, the sparks, the videos themselves, as well as the artifacts that the participants have been producing to create on Wikiversity, which is essentially one of Wikimedia's other entities that hosts learning materials. So it's kind of an open educational resource, plethora of resources. And we decided this would be a great place to put it for lots of different reasons, and similar with the Wikipedia entry, because we feel that in this context of bottom up, in this context of self-determination and agency, we thought it would be ideal to put these artifacts out there in a way that allows for others to build upon and to engage with in a more equitable relationship of knowledge exchange. So just giving a sense of this is still in draft, but this is how we are conceptualizing the syllabus portion of it. So we'll have kind of this landing page, and then within this, we actually have the individual sessions become individual modules. And so we can take a look at this would be the first session this is the second session that we did. I'm on the wrong, it's not the one I wanted to show. Sorry about that. There we go. This one is more complete, but So it would be a listing of the learning materials. Then we have the video sparks from our different speakers from that first session. Then we go into the learning artifacts, and this is where, you know, the participants have really shined in creating and sharing a variety of different materials that they've created for others to learn and build upon. So any one of these, anybody who comes to this can actually use these and learn, not just from the Sparks, but also from other participants. That's how we've structured their weekly assignments, is really thinking about how do you communicate what you've learned to somebody who's new to this topic or wanting to learn more about this topic. Then we also provide some discussion or some ideas for an activity. So the other part of this is, as a syllabus, offering activities, assignments that can be borrowed or adapted and put into courses that people may be teaching, or taking it as taking the entire thing and adapting it as a potential course on digital self-determination. The other thing, and this is one of the objects that's an offshoot of this, is we were talking about that bibliography earlier. And this is the bibliography. I believe Carmen counted them up, and there's about 85 or 86 entries. And so here again is this annotated bibliography, this way that people can learn more or delve into a lot of the research. So this is one of the offshoots of the syllabus. The Wikipedia entry, we have not moved yet into, or fully into, the Wikipedia space, into the sandbox. But I did want to give you a sense of, this is a super robust, like every time I went into this, I was delightfully overwhelmed, in the sense that the participants have been working so hard on this and developing such a rich and detailed entry, and one that I think, you know, does well to reflect and raise a lot of the issues and the ideas that we brought up, as well as pull in a lot of the research that we saw in that bibliography. So I'm just gonna kind of scroll through here what the outline is and a little bit of the first few pages, you know, and I'm not, for privacy's sake, I'm not going to show what's on the right side, which is lots of comments. This is one of my favorite things about using something like, whether it's a wiki or in this case, a Google Doc, is there's such rich conversation about what is in here going on the right side, that if I counted, I have no doubt there'd be at least 100 or more comments of participants just having rich conversations, making sure certain ideas are clarified, or certain points of views get heard. And so I just wanted to highlight this to give you a sense. We'll be finishing this up in the next week and share it out as a follow-up email as well, to this event, along with the recording to this event and other things. But just to kind of give you a glimpse of what you can anticipate seeing. It has been a tremendous amount of work by our participants, and I applaud all of them for bringing such richness in terms of their work in both the creating artifacts and actually, you know, and developing out this entry. I can't wait for it to be published to point people to this work. So I just wanted to highlight that. And then I'm going to stop share for a second. And I'm going to have to reshare again, because we're going to move into the next portion, which is we're going to hear from the participants to provide, they were asked to give a video response to what recommendations, based upon, you know, all the learning and conversations that they have, what recommendations would they give to the Swiss government about, as they navigate their thoughts on digital self-determination and what that means for the Swiss people. This will be followed by Roger, who will provide some commentary in response to those videos, as well as some other thoughts on the concept and the work that's been done. So give me 1 second to reshare. And all right. So I'm going to play the videos. I will warn people, you know, sometimes the sound may be a little jarring when you share video. So I'm going to try to keep an eye out for that in the chat. If people can let me know, just write in the chat if the sound isn't working or is too loud.
So out of this research sprints, I think the three most important things about digital self-determination that governments, in this case the Swiss government, can work on is the following. So the first one is the question of whose self-determination we're talking about, because we know that digital self-determination for states and for individuals are very different things. States have different interests than individuals. States may care about, the right to regulate the cyberspace, but individuals may care more about, the right to access data, like personal data and their privacy. So that's the first question. The second question, it's about who has access, right? So if we think about individual data privacy issues, who would have access to such data? Does the government have access to such data? What kind of government has access to such data is also a very important question. And for what purpose too? If it's not a government body, what kind of non-government bodies have access to that data is also another good question. Last but not least, I think this is the most important point as well, which is about translating individual action to collective action. We talk about digital self-determination that could help build communities, that could help articulate a particular identity. So how can we do that? Well, a lot of the individual actions that we're doing here are at the individual level. So is it possible that we build communities through individual action? Yes, but there must be some kind of mechanism in the digital realm such that our individual actions, such as opting out of privacy things, opting out of data collection stuff, could help build communities. Or, sometimes it could just be an expression of our identity through digital means. If we can do that at the individual level, and we can aggregate them somehow, and then we will have built a community. So that's a very important thing to think about as well, which is how can we translate individual actions to collective action, and how to build communities that sort of surround this idea of digital self-determination.
Hello, I'm Carmen. My first point when it comes to working on the topic of digital self-determination would be global perspectives. So we learned that the real choices and risks mediated by technologies around the world are really existing in very diverse socio-political context, which is why it's super important to go beyond the relatively US or Europe-driven discussion on the topic and to proactively bring in perspectives from the rest of the world with massive populations. Maybe one way to give it a start is to have more bilingual content or bilingual conversations, not mainly only in English. My second point builds on the first, which would be about bottom-up discussions. So with digital self-determination, it's about the empowerment of people, then we should engage with people in the process. And sometimes bottom-up conversations outside of academia or summits can source ideas from local communities and may help us understand the surprising use cases or questions or consequences on the topic. My third and last point is a question about actionables. How do we turn high-level principles into any sort of actionables or measurables that can help an organization situate itself in this big topic and maybe even help them measure their flaws or progress when it comes to their influence on digital self-determination? So I think for now, these are my 3 ideas. Thank you for your time.
Hi, my name is Christian Tönnes. My first point is about transparency and open source solutions. Data-driven solutions can only unfold their full potential when they are met with broad social acceptance. And that acceptance can only be achieved when all people affected know what they are consenting to and are thus self-determinated. To be specific, that means that when governments purchase software from private manufacturers, they should not hide behind trade secrets or IP law in order to avoid accountability. Much rather, they should use open source solutions and release their source codes. That way, independent experts can identify problems and security loopholes early on, and social acceptance is much higher. My second point is about decentralization. I believe that whenever possible, governments should opt for decentral data storage structures. Experience has shown that whenever large data treasures fall into the hands of powerful central entities, numerous human rights and security breaches ensue. Under modern technological circumstances, dealing with all the data is just too much of a responsibility for one entity to bear and too much of a temptation for private and state interests to allow. Thirdly, and I would like to emphasize that digital self-determination is not a state of being or something one can just achieve, but more of a process, a perspective through which policy processes can be viewed. By no means would I be able to pinpoint everything that needs to be considered, but for me, it means realizing that digitalization and big data are no ends in themselves. Not every data-driven option should be adopted just because these buzzwords sound so appealing or they seem to make some things more convenient for some. Much rather, data-driven solutions should only be taken if they really improve the human condition. All risks that they can carry should be screened. And if they help all people to become agents of their digital and physical existence, they should be adopted.
Nearly 10 weeks ago, we were tasked with deciding what digital self-determination meant to us. Since then, we've grappled with this concept across a wide range of topics, including the economy, healthcare, digital solidarity, and even establishing a social contract for life in outer space. If digital self-determination is based on giving citizens control over their data and sense of self online, how can this be ensured? Is digital self-determination limited only to data control and rights, or should it be expanded to encompass a wider range of protections that enable human flourishing online? While this topic is complex and impossible to distill into one short video, there are 3 central points I wish to highlight from our conversations about digital self-determination. First, digital self-determination does not have a single definition. The term itself varies across languages, cultures, and legal contexts around the globe. While consensus about this term might be difficult to reach, debates about this concept and policies drawn from it require diverse, international, and indigenous perspectives, interrogating its ties to histories of colonialism and Western ideologies. Secondly, the concept of digital self-determination should not only be evoked when speaking about individual rights, but also the rights of the collective. Discussions throughout the research sprint have highlighted the ways in which individual autonomy and identity is often inseparable from collective freedoms in one's community. Policies surrounding digital self-determination should not be the result of top-down decision-making, but that at the local and community levels. Lastly, our understanding of digital self-determination should remain malleable and part of an open and iterative process. As new technologies are introduced and existing technologies better understood, these innovations require constant evaluation of what means to us, our local communities, and our digital worlds. While ensuring digital self-determination presents trade-offs and complex questions, it presents a vital topic of study, increasingly relevant for challenges facing the internet today. What does digital self-determination mean to you?
Awesome. Thank you for that. And apparently you can hear me when I say, oh, shoot. I think that's what I said. We'll find out in the recording. Press the wrong tab and the screen went gray. Apologies for that. But what great videos, what great insights and questions and thoughts from our participants. And there's many other videos that we will be also sharing over with Roger, and as well as having as part of our final session. So thank you all for those thoughtful and invoking videos. And I now hand it over to Roger de Bock, who will provide us with some commentary. And for those, again, he's a Swiss ambassador who was with us during the first session and gave us some initial thoughts to really to ground us in. And he returns now to provide some additional thoughts on kind of where we've been. So Roger, I believe you're in here somewhere.
I'm here. Hi, Lance.
There we go.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. So hello to everybody. I'm delighted to be with you today, and it's so a nice discussion I've been following now, and also these videos are really amazing. So thank you very much for all the work you have put into this question of digital self-determination. So I would like to reply or to comment somehow the the 4 videos we have just seen, and then later on perhaps give some thought about potential next steps, or how we would like from our perspective to continue the discussion. On the 4 videos, I think I have more or less 5 remarks. So I would like to start with the terminology, because already before, but now also during these 4 videos, I think it's intriguing, the term of self-determination, but I think also for many people not so easy. And so from our perspective, just I think we fully agree that that there's no single definition, of course. And what I would like to underline is really the importance that the self means individual and collective. And I think even if you go back to international law, the terminology of digital self-determination is very much about people, parts of population. So there's definitely the collective part in the self. And something I think is important also when it comes to the self, that I believe that the self in the digital space is quite different from the self in the physical space. If I take the physical world, I can live in the forest for the rest of my life as an eremit, and nobody cares about me. And this is completely possible. In the digital space, I think the self is from the beginning very much connected. You can't be an isolated person in the digital space. So there I think that the self in the digital space is from the beginning a kind of a connected self. And then on the socio-political context, of course, I think as there is no single definition, there's absolutely a need to bring all the different perspectives. And as was mentioned in the videos, I think it was Carmen, that there's the need for a global perspective. I fully agree. And I'm so happy that we had this spring, and with this spring, a global perspective on this topic. The second point is about action. I fully believe that this effort has to be action-oriented. We definitely would like to have a bottom-up approach. This is, by the way, quite close to our Swiss culture with the direct democracy. So we start very much from the scratch, and we build up. So that's completely in line with our ideas. And in this sense, we are very much interested in use cases. And I think I will come back to this point later on. So we really try to see how it works on the ground, how projects or even use cases on digital self-determinations are put in place, and learn from these experiences, precisely to avoid purely abstract, high-level policy dialogues. The third point is about participation. No, I come back to action-oriented when I talk about the use cases. I think already the first time we were discussing the concept, I said that in our perspective, the concept of digital self-determination is very much linked to the idea of data spaces, and we call them trustworthy data spaces, because we think that the self needs a bigger space finally to function. And in these data spaces, of course, there is a need of participation. And this is my third point. So in the video, it was said we need to build communities. There should not be a kind of a top-down approach, but discussion at the community level. And that's our idea, that if you build data spaces, that should be exactly possible to do that. And then you need a kind of a governance structure, an institutional setup where the community has its word and can participate in the functioning, governing of a data space. My fourth point comes to principles. I think Christian mentioned transparency, decentralization. So I definitely think that there is the need for some basic principles to build finally data spaces. And I think all these principles should help to build trust in the end. I think it will be very much about how are we able to build trust. And this brings me to my final remark, the fifth point. I think, again, Christian and Hilary said it should be a process. And especially as technology moves forward. And that's a very important point where I fully agree. At the same time, I think that we should also clearly say what we expect from technology. So it's also up to us to decide what type of technology we want to use. And for instance, one example which comes to my mind is I talked once to a big insurance company and about such ideas. And they said, yes, we could imagine to do something like that, but only if customers ask. We are not going to do it if there's no customer asking for it. So I think it's important that we come up with clear ideas about what we want. And then I will end with this. I think that finally how we want to deal with data becomes then a very much a discussion about values. And so I think digital self-determination is definitely a value-based approach to data. So these are my 5 remarks. Once again, thank you very much for these videos. I hope that I will get them in the end. And so I don't know if I should continue or if somebody would like to react on these points. So I give back to you, Lance, and you tell me how you want to proceed. Thank you very much.
Sure. Thank you so much. If we're happy to entertain a question or two or comment or two in response. If people have them, feel free to raise the hand or put it into the chat, whichever makes most sense.
I have a quick question if I'm allowed.
Yeah, absolutely. Go for it.
Yeah, thank you, Roger, so much for sharing that. I am very curious. I think one common theme that we have experienced throughout this research sprint, and I think you brought it up as well, is, and the video said as well, in terms of how you define or how big the concept of digital self-determination really is and how many different things it can mean. And I think especially through working on the Wikipedia entry, I thought it was very helpful to kind of map the different components of digital self-determination and bringing together all these different perspectives and calls for action for devising new ways of managing data, for instance, to protect privacy, but also in terms of digital platform, like digital media, like social media, how to design more humane technology, more humane user interfaces, how we need to bridge the digital divide. So there are a lot of different demands that I think are necessary to achieve digital self-determination. And I'm wondering I'm curious to hear from your work, if there's one in particular of all these different components, misinformation, et cetera, that you're prioritizing or you're tackling first that you think might be most urgent in addressing first, given that there are so many different so many different components where you could start working on this topic. So is there one in particular of the ones I mentioned, or another one that you're strategizing first?
Thank you very much for the question. We are focusing on what I said, building trustworthy data spaces based on digital self-determination. And one example we are working on in Switzerland is on health. I mean, a lot of people are working on that. So we have in Switzerland an electronic patient files, and where we try to bring in this idea of digital self-determination. And what we see now is that it's very difficult that it works, because you really have to find the right way between control over my data as on my health data. At the same time, the data has to be used by hospitals, by doctors. So that's, for instance, now a concrete example where we are working on. So I would say that the type of use cases we are working on is very much, it's health, then also energy, mobility. So we try to apply this concept to, in the end, to infrastructure in Switzerland. That's our main concern right now.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you for your question, Costanza. Any others? Anybody else have something to follow up with? All right. Roger, I think you had mentioned you wanted to discuss some next steps. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I had a first discussion with Urs as well. So but I'm just presenting my ideas. In Switzerland, we had set up a national network on digital self-determination, precisely to exchange experiences. As I said before, I mean, in different sectors, people are thinking about how to deal with, let's say, digital self-determination, and to cross the, to exchange the experiences and to see what works, what doesn't work. And we are now also building up an international network for doing that. And we have already identified some actors. We are talking to them right now. And my idea would be that it would be great to include some of you from this sprint in this international network. It could be a kind of a subgroup, or all this has to be discussed. It could be a kind of a sounding board, or where experimental work could be done. So this would be my suggestion, because I think that it's very important to talk to different type of people, and especially now I'm working for a government. So it's not the idea that we are just talking to other governments. And as this sprint is so inspiring, I thought it would be nice to recruit some people. So this is one idea, and I don't think at this stage we could say exactly how it will work. This has to be figured out, but my suggestion would be that if some of you are interested in exchanging on this idea, to get in touch with Lance, and then we could set up a discussion. But maybe if we have time now, I would be interested to know whether you think that would be a good idea or not. And of course, it could be also useful. For instance, I'm organizing for the Swiss ambassadors are meeting every year, and this year it will be on digital diplomacy. So I thought it could be good also to include some of you for these workshops. So this kind of idea. I
will say as a follow-up, I will be sending out a form to kind of sign up for some of these opportunities, as I know for some folks are very interested in pursuing and continuing the conversation in many ways. And I know for other folks, a break might be needed or some time to work on other things. So I will have a sign up sheet for these types of opportunities coming out as a result of this. But to Roger's point, does anybody have, or to his question of thoughts or reflections on such collaborations? All right. Well, all right. Roger, thank you so much. I'm sure if there are following questions, I will either be facilitating them to you or you'll hear from them directly. Meanwhile, thank you again for those thoughts and for kind of guiding us or letting us know what's on the horizon. I want to turn to Mal, who is also going to continue that conversation as well.
Great. Thank you, Lance. Roger, it was so great to hear from you. I know I've read the paper that you've shared on this space, and it's really exciting to see how you might find other touch points to connect with this group in particular. I wanted to take the chance to call on a few of our other friends who contributed in previous sessions, people like Kirsten Volkinger and Christian Fiesler. I would have liked to call Alexa as well, but I think she had to step out. I would love, given sort of your experience as stewards and partners along this incredible journey, to sort of invite you to think ahead and say, are there points at which you imagine we would come back to this conversation in the next 2-3 years? Are there trends where you think digital self-determination will play a big role? Are there developments that you see along this trajectory where this kind of group of people sharing insights, doing critical work could be a really great repository and resource? So any ideas you have for where we could take this journey, what are the next stops along the way, would be really great. Kirsten, can I call on you first?
Of course, thank you very much. Yeah, so a really important question, an important topic. And maybe just to follow also up and to combine that with what Roger just said about what's going on in Switzerland and what's going on inside the government. So I really believe that this topic and all the questions surrounding this topic of digital self-determination will get even more important in the near future. For example, we saw that the European Commission introduced just this month, or was it last month, a proposal for the Artificial Intelligence Act, where we can see that Europe now really tries to focus on technology, regulation of technology. Now there are pros and cons, of course, regarding this act, but we can see that it is really an important topic. And we can also see that Switzerland also tries to adopt to this act. So this is just what we can see in Switzerland. We can also see all pressure from, for example, pharmaceutical companies. And they say that more digitalization is necessary so that they can really use also the data and that they can accelerate access to health, etc. And of course, it's then important that we can balance different interests involved. So what I want to say with all of this is that we can see that there are a lot of advancements. And I definitely believe that what you guys explored here in the digital self-determination research sprint is just so valuable. And it would be great if we could go on with these discussions, be that, for example, as Rasha mentioned, some students interacting in such a sounding board, or a research sprint 2.0 on digital self-determination, whatever that form might be. But I think it would be really important and interesting to do this again. Thank you.
I think at Berkman and the Hub, we're very big fans of 2.0 of anything. So we always like revisiting and knowing that nothing is static and things change, and we like adapting and staying cool and with it. So that's really great to hear. Can I turn to you, Christian, to see from sort of a digital economy perspective, if you see any great trends or opportunities for reflection and collaboration?
Oh, I have to be spontaneous. I will try my best. Well, what I find really wonderful or interesting in the whole discussions, also which the ones which I heard just now, is maybe I'm totally wrong, but I hear a little bit this idea: how can we make digital work again for us, right? This idea when I heard about, for instance, digital detoxing and all these topics, I find this topic interesting. In terms of, and how far do we actually have ownership in the infrastructures that we do build? And especially now when you relate it to kind of like economic principles, right? Kind of like digital infrastructures, which we talked about, or marketplaces or employment opportunities. And I think, and again, it's a very spontaneous association, but this whole idea of equity and equality and how far these spaces are built, I find very interesting. Maybe I have more intelligent reflections coming up, but I really like this idea of, kind of, for lack of a better word, I'm putting it in horrible German English, but this idea of having equity in what we actually build.
Yeah, that's super important. And I think it's something that the participants have reflected on and brought out in all of their artifacts and work, just different ways of, whether it's distributive justice or collaboration or bottoms-up approaches, linguistic inclusion, other kinds of inclusion. So yeah, that's super important. Maybe I'm going to exercise my privilege as moderator to call on Wolfgang next and ask Wolfgang, do you see, from a sort of law, policy, governance perspective, are there going to be interesting developments that come when it comes to digital self-determination in the next few years? Anything you might want to highlight?
Yeah, sure. I'm really happy about this very fundamental debate and the different complexions we put on it, because what I see is that, speaking from a European perspective again, that the approach that has been adopted and to some extent exported in Europe of this very rigid concept, and I would say old-fashioned concept of data protection, will not be really future-proof. That's what I believe. And the GDPR brought a lot of the data protection regulation in Europe brought a lot of I think helpful things. But it is still an old-fashioned concept of data protection. And I personally believe that we need a debate on new concepts here and to rethink privacy, to see where can we really move the burden to the individual, protecting him or herself, and where we need other concepts, more risk-based concepts, more concepts that are orientated at communities and not at individuals and things like that. And I think we need to start this conversation, and it's a long-term thing. It's not something that will change our thinking in privacy and data protection terms very, very soon. And I don't want to see actors misuse this debate to weaken data protection. That's always a risk there as well. But I think we need this kind of conversation and things like the debates we have right now, and maybe revisiting this debate in a couple of months or years will be extremely helpful for this kind of very fundamental conversation about the future of privacy protection.
Yeah, super important, Wolfgang. I think, we've also been exploring in Asia sort of more communitarian and collective ideas, like concepts of group privacy, which I think something like COVID has accelerated. This idea that you might have privacy as a group, you could be discriminated as a group, even if your individual data is not shared, but also there are ways to address that collectively through privacy preserving technologies and different technological tools. So yeah, that's super important to note. So I'm going to call on Roger in a minute to see if he would like to comment on any of the remarks that have been made so far?
Thank you very much. I just saw that there was one question for me in the chat, so on digital self-determination and artificial intelligence, whether there is a link. I think there's definitely a link, and I mean, as all of us know, that it's very important to get the data right to have good artificial intelligence applications. So I think also for artificial intelligence, digital self-determination could help to have quality-based artificial intelligence somehow. We do not have a kind of a national plan at this stage, because the question was around that. And I'm also involved in this work on Council of Europe on artificial intelligence. And what I see now in this debate is that it's very much principle based. There are all these high level principles, but nobody really knows how to bring it down to something more concrete. So once again, also here, I think it's important to become concrete somehow. And yeah, that's it for now. I think on the other points,
Yeah.
I comments.
Yes.
Perhaps
Thank you.
Carmen in the chat, how we could set up a kind of alumni group. That sounds very interesting, I think.
Yeah, I think we're trying to come up with all kinds of cool ways for this cohort to take this forward, to, as Carmen said, to amplify and further curate these materials and resources and be little nodes of this little network that we've created. So I think we're planning all kinds of things. I think the MetaLab and Edgelens folks have come up with ideas of doing, speculative fiction or other kinds of short story collections that take the Red Skies project idea forward. I know we are thinking at the Digital Asia Hub whether we should be starting some kind of a fellowship to take these ideas forward in Asia. So I think we're all very excited by the outputs that have emerged in such a short span, and really excited to think about what could we possibly create if we had even more time. I think that would be really exciting to see. So I think I'm going to, nobody has ever complained if we end sessions early, in my experience, just like people never complain that they wish they'd spent more time at the office at their deathbed. Very similar concept. But I'm going to turn it over to Urs to give the final word of thanks on behalf of the Berkman Center, on behalf of Digital Asia Hub. It's just been such a privilege and pleasure to see all of your faces every week, video materials, and see the enthusiasm, courage, and just the wonderful insights that you've brought to this process, and how willingly, with such great spirit, you've all participated and given so fully of yourselves. But thank you from me, and Urs, over to you.
Thank you, Roger. Thank you, Malavika. Thank you, everyone. I don't have much more to add than our thanks as well for a great journey, as you put it earlier, and we're looking forward to continuing the conversation. I would say one area that we haven't mentioned is, of course, that is close to our heart as well, is research and education. Education was mentioned, but we haven't talked so much about research. I do think there are still many open research questions out there that are worth pursuing as well in a connected way. I think we have seen the value of interdisciplinarity in addition to a global approach to the topic of digital self-determination. I feel we still are in the conceptual phase. It's still a high-level conversation, as Ambassador Dubach also reminded us. There is much groundwork we need to do, a lot of on-the-ground empirical research that could follow over the next few years from many different disciplinary angles and using various methodologies. So for those who wear hats as researchers, I do feel there is a fantastic agenda shaping up for future engagement. So with that, last call, more research is needed. With that, thank you again. I'm not sure whether there are any final remarks by Lance or Liz. So jump in right now if there are.
I put remarks in the chat, but I also wanted to say if people want to hold on afterwards, for those that want to do a group Zoom selfie, we'll take a snapshot of that. But obviously, if you don't want to for privacy reasons or the like, by all means, we'll have you sign off. But for everybody that is interested in doing so, I think we're going to try to do that. That was just recommended by Adil, and I am going to run with that idea. So I do want to say thank you to everybody as well on so many levels. And it's been wonderful, and there will be more follow-up, obviously, as we finish the loop, close the circles on the entry and the Wikipedia entry and the syllabus. So thank you, everybody.